Hello, and welcome to Religion and Life. I'm your host, Ozzie Ostwalt. Virtually all of the global religions talk about feeding those in need, whether it's Christianity, Judaism, or Islam. Giving of alms and providing for hospitality is a major ethical part of religion. Our guest today, Renee Boughman, is executive chef and executive director of F.A.R.M Cafe here in Boone. And while not explicitly a religious organization, F.A.R.M Cafe has support from religious organizations around the high country with the expressed purpose of feeding those regardless of means. Renee, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
I'd like to give you the opportunity just to introduce yourself. As I said, you're currently executive chef and executive director of F.A.R.M Cafe, but you're getting ready to transition a little bit. So maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do with F.A.R.M Cafe.
Okay. I currently am operating as the executive director, and included in that has been my role as executive chef, and I've been there for 10 years from concept to opening, and we actually started the concept in 2009. So actually a little over 10 years that I've been involved in this process with lots of good people from the community. But we're getting ready to transition. I'm so excited about this opportunity for the cafe. We are going to split that role into two positions, which will be an executive chef, Pete Herbert, and an executive director, Elena Dalton. Both of them are going to be tremendous in the leadership of the cafe. Elena's been with us for 5 years, knows all about some of our food recovery operations that she helped create, and has been operating as our director of operations. Pete just came on about 4 months ago. He's been a cook in this area and a chef in this area for a long time, so we're so excited to have them as part of the team. And then around them will be the regular team that's so solid at the cafe. We'll still have our manager, Kim Short. We'll still have our volunteer coordinator, Abby Huggins. We'll still have assistant manager, Grayson Arthurs. And then Ross Aguilaro does our full circle food recovery program. So all those people will still be in place. So when you come in the cafe, that warm, welcome, inclusive attitude will continue to follow. And I'm thrilled because I get to go be kind of back out of the daily operations, getting a little bit older, need to take a little break from that day-to-day physical activity of the kitchen. And I get to serve as the director of community engagement, which to me means I get to tell the story of F.A.R.M Cafe, and there's nothing I enjoy more. That's just an honest truth.
Yeah, and maybe we should back up just a little bit. F.A.R.M Cafe, F.A.R.M is an acronym.
It is.
And I think this is right, feeding all regardless of means.
That's correct. Yeah. It's feed all regardless of means, and it is a kind of an open, inclusive attitude where our goal is when someone comes in the door at F.A.R.M Cafe, we welcome them with open arms as best possible. We allow them to participate in community and tell their story if they choose to. But we want to make sure that we do this with a healthy, nutritious plate of food, and that they understand that our main role is to get them food if they need it, but the food is the vehicle primarily to create community, because that's how we're able to start looking at each other as human beings.
Right. And just to be clear, it's pay what you will, right?
It is.
So there are no prices set.
That's correct.
And if you don't have the means at the time, you can still eat and trade labor or volunteer time in order to get a good, healthy meal. Is that, now, if someone had come to me with a business model and said, we're going to open a cafe without prices and just let people pay what they think it's worth, I would have said, there's no way you're going to make it.
And I would have joined you. I absolutely thought it was a disastrous formula for operation, because I've been in food service for a long time. I've been working as a chef over in Blowing Rock at a couple of locations. I had been to culinary school. I had operated in the business for over 20 years. And when this idea was presented, I thought, this is one of those pie-in-the-sky things that people talk about, but it's not possible that you could operate this way. But I started doing research with other community members and got in touch with some folks, in particular Denise Soretta, kind of started this movement out in Salt Lake City, Utah. She had a cafe called One World Cafe, and we started talking. I called her thinking, she's not going to call me back. She's, you know, this little woman in North Carolina. She immediately called back and was very supportive, and in fact, she stayed in touch and mentored us and got us in touch with other cafes that were operating, like Same Cafe in Denver, which is the oldest running cafe in the country of the same kind of venue, that same attitude of volunteer labor, taking care of your neighbor, allowing people to have a meal and volunteer in exchange. And so Brad and Libby Berkey were operating that cafe, and they became immediate mentors for me and my staff in the beginning stages. And that, you know, it was incredible how that support and that networking helped us get open. And Denise even flew here on her own dime. On the first 2 days we were open and came and stayed with us and kind of held our hand through the process. So it was remarkable from the very start. I knew that this is something a little bit different.
Yeah, and not only have you made it, but you were founded in 2009. So we're going on 12 or 13 years here. It's been a tremendous asset to the community, and what a remarkable concept to put into action and to see through to success. Now, one thing you said that caught my attention is that you provide nutritious food and also good tasting food. I know.
We do.
But I just pulled the menu for today, and I wanted to read a little bit of it here just to get some of the highlights. Sesame chicken meatball soup, and it's dinner time now, so I'm going to get hungry. Sweet potato roasted roasted tempeh soup, Carolina shrimp and grits, mushroom tempeh and grits, roasted veggies, cornbread, salads, cookies. And this sounds like the menu from a 4-star Michelin restaurant here. So.
Well, we do like to serve as high a quality food as we can.
Yeah.
And sometimes we do. There's a little bit of humor in our discussion of the menus, because we do a daily menu. And one of the things that we're blessed with in this community, I don't know if people realize how amazing the growers and the farmers are in this actual community, and we can draw off of that. So we purchase as much local as we possibly can. And once you start putting high quality food into a system, you don't have to do a lot to it to make it good. But sometimes the menu, like even today, we said, this menu's a little heavy-handed. It's a little bit, you know, for lunch, it's a little heavy-handed. But kind of in celebration of the fact that this is my last week of cooking, we're honoring, this was a request from someone who had it before, and we're like, so we're trying to listen to the diners, but we also know, I used to think, and honestly it was a little naive on my part, we do a buffet setting, and so when someone comes in, we always have 2 soups and we'll have a salad, and right now the salads are beautiful because it's all local greens, local ingredients. But then we'll have an entree with a protein, and we try to have a vegetarian entree and put all the attributes so people know whether it's vegan, gluten-free, etc. But I thought, well, we'll have this large buffet and people come through and they'll pick and choose. But what the majority of people do is say, I'll have one of everything.
Oh, really?
They'll just come through and they'll have one of everything. Yeah. And one day I said to one of the people that was struggling a little bit with housing and had been in and out of homeless situations, and I said, you know, I realize, I feel like sometimes we serve way too much food. And he said, which was good for me to hear, he said, well, actually, Renee, as a person who knows this might be the only meal I'm going to get that day, I feel like it's really great to know that this is what's going to be available to me, because I may not have dinner and I definitely wouldn't have had breakfast. So if you're thinking about that relationship, I want you to know that it means a lot to me that you have adequate food available and it's not a small portion. And I said, well, I appreciate you telling me that, because that helped me. Yes.
Yeah. So you're not a religious organization.
We are not.
But you do involve at many different levels the community. You mentioned the growers, and we may come back to that later on. But I think at least in the beginning, that the United Church of Christ of the High Country was instrumental in helping get this started. So there was a kind of push from at least one religious organization,
Yes.
And I think you maybe get some support from others. You want to talk a little bit about the role that religious organizations in this community have played in support of F.A.R.M. Cafe?
Yes, the High Country United Church of Christ was my faith community, is my faith community, and from the beginning, the idea for F.A.R.M. Cafe took seed in that population. We were having conversations about different ways to address food insecurity and hunger in this area, and so it was that group of folks that started thinking about it. We actually traveled to different locations together to do research. We started talking and doing some fundraising activities through that community of faith. But we knew from the beginning, and this was really important to me, and I appreciated the perspective of the UCC, that this had to be an open and inclusive community with no conditions set. Because sometimes there are organizations that may feed people, but at the same time may want to share their literature or information with them. And I'm not casting aspersions on that, but that is not our philosophy. The idea was this door is open to all, and that's the way we want it to be. So the original board members, I would say the majority of them came from the UCC. We still get quite a bit of support from the UCC. They actually have us as one of the line items of support in their how they distribute their funding. And then we have other communities of faith that participate too. Part of that was COVID driven. We've always had support from other groups, but a lot of the area churches found themselves in the dilemma of not being able to serve meals, for example, at the hospitality house where they'd always gone, served, prepared. And so now it's continued kind of in a quarantine setting there. They will come to us like St. Mary of the Hills, Grace Lutheran, the Heart Faith Community. Several of them will come to us and they will sponsor a meal through F.A.R.M. Cafe. We'll prepare it, we'll package it, and we distribute it as an outreach meal to the hospitality house and let them know this meal was prepared in honor of St. Mary of the Hills because they've been doing this for 24 years.
Right.
So it's allowing them to continue that connection, and it makes us feel that that's a relationship that is worthy and honorable to let those folks know and let us all know that everybody's trying to participate to help each other.
Yeah, and I want to come back to the UCC Church in a moment, but I was looking around on some of the websites, and you'd mentioned the One World Everybody Eats Cafe in Salt Lake City. And I just took a look at their board members, and there was a yoga teacher, there was a church staff member, there was a clergy person. So, I guess it's one of those sort of universal religious ethical positions that hunger is a problem and a duty to address from a religious and a spiritual perspective.
I think that's true. I mean, from my personal belief system, it's just an automatic. If there's anything that stands out in the gospel word, it's, if you want to be effective, then feed people.
Right.
I mean, that's something Jesus was pretty emphatic about. And while we don't bring religious language to our setting, I do think for me it is a spiritual path, because my pastor often says, and I really appreciate that she's very honest about this, because I'm not the most good at attendance. I'll be honest on a Sunday morning. I look forward to my weekend.
I'm not checking up
yeah,
on you.
but she'll say, Renee, you're doing church 4 to 5 days a week. Yeah. I think you're good. She said, this is church. And to me, that is a big part of that philosophy. And I think the UCC really encourages that. They encourage, from my perspective, being the church more than worrying so much about the structure of sitting in a particular facility and worshiping in a particular way. It's more about what are you doing that reflects a faith that cares about each other.
Yeah, sometimes when we talk about traditions in religious studies, we talk about orthodoxy as right belief, but we also talk about orthopraxy, and that is right practice. And what I'm hearing you say is that part of your faith tradition tends to focus on the practice part, putting into action those beliefs. If you don't mind, I'd like to talk about United Church of Christ just a little bit, because I think it's one of those faith traditions in the high country that perhaps is lesser known. We see, the expected Baptist churches and Methodist churches and Presbyterian churches. United Church of Christ is also in the Protestant tradition, but not as well known in this part of the world, in the South, particularly in the mountains. But the UCC does have a long history of progressive social activism from a spiritual perspective. On the website, it mentions doing justice, seeking peace, and building community. So is that part of the way you understand the UCC ethos?
It is, and I was one of those people. I moved to Boone in 1982. I grew up Baptist, but I had left the church for a long time because it wasn't working for me. And I had studied religion a fair amount. I got a master's in history at Appalachian, and I'd always taken religion classes because it's always been something I enjoyed. I was really taken with liberation theology, and still am in that kind of sense of freedom of thought. And when I saw UCC, I saw their ad in the paper locally, I thought, this is either going to be a very fundamentalist community, which won't match up with what I'm looking for, or this is something new I don't know about. And so when I attended, I was like, this is what I was looking for, a place where I love the fact that I always tell people the one thing the UCC is really good at is being honored with the questions. The fact that the national logo for the UCC is Gracie Allen's comma, which says, never place a period where God has placed a comma, God is still speaking. I'm like, hey, how great is that it was Gracie Allen that came up with that? But it's a very kind of embracing attitude, I think, that the UCC has. And my understanding, again, not really being a true historian of that faith, is that it's compiled of a lot of people who were just not satisfied in the Protestant path they were in, but they were still drawn to something bigger out there, felt there was something more. And so our community here has a lot of folks who were Baptist, a lot of folks who came from the Catholic tradition, who may have come from never attending church. And it makes for quite an eclectic, progressive group, and quite enjoyable.
Yeah, sounds like it. Yeah, and historically, you said there are people like Barton Stone and Alexander Campbell, Charles G. Finney in the 19th century. Some of the names that we talk about in our history of religion classes. And part of that history of kind of progressive social action includes support in the 19th century for the abolition movement, support for women's rights and civil rights in the 20th century. So there is a long history of that element within the UCC Church. So it seems like a kind of natural outgrowth that here in the high country, there would be a driving force behind this effort to address food insecurity.
Sure, and they've, again, the one thing I welcome is the discussion that happens in that faith community about the support of F.A.R.M. Cafe, but also the recognition that, as I said from the beginning, to not put a stamp on it of any faith that allows all to participate. They're actually coming in early November we do a program called Boon Lunch, and what that is a sponsorship that we allow. Different groups can come in, they pay a fee up front, and that covers the cost of the food for the day. So anything that comes in above that allows for us to put that money toward folks in need and to continue our operations. So, and it allows people to participate and see where their dollars are going and be a part of it. And the UCC community is actually coming in early November to do Baboon Lunch, which is great. They'll participate, they'll have volunteers, and we've had different businesses who've done that also. But again, it's a direct way for them to put their faith into action if that's how they feel they need to do it. And I think it's been amazing for us. And I wouldn't be a participant in F.A.R.M Cafe had it not been for the High Country United Church of Christ, because it was there that I made the relationships initially of folks who were committed to this type of thought, and would not have had the emotional as well as financial, physical support to get it off the ground when it was so shaky in the beginning.
Yeah. Well, and we mentioned some of the values that social justice and food insecurity, but there are also some values that may not be quite as readily noticeable. It seems that you address things like environmental injustice through your sustainability efforts.
Sure.
You want to mention, talk about that just a little bit.
Sure.
No?
So, we do some of the things that a lot of different restaurants do in the area, but we do compost. We do try to use compostable materials within our community so that we're trying to help in that way. But on a bigger level, one of the programs that we have, and again, the new executive director, Elena Dalton, was responsible for creating this amazing program called Full Circle. But that program in particular has impact because we bring in donations of fruits and vegetables that basically just have to come off the shelf because they've got a little blemish here or there. We take those foods and vegetables and are able to reconstitute them, repurpose them into something that is usable. We make soups, we make sauces, we make family meals that can then be redistributed into the community at no charge to others. By doing that, we've been able, when we first started, to be honest, it was so funny. You set these goals. So our goal was, let's keep 1,000 pounds of food out of the waste system. We're going to keep it out of that situation. And so we hit that mark in 3 months. We hit that mark. It's amazing how much we've now up to around 60,000 pounds that have been kept out of.
It's amazing.
Yeah, out of circulation into the waste system, because we've been able to utilize that product and make sure that it goes to people in need, and it's high quality food. You take a poor piece of lettuce, right off what's really good underneath.
Right.
But because our culture is so, aesthetically driven by certain things, it's like, well, that can't stay on the shelf. And so it's just going to end up in the landfill. Well, that's a major cause of waste and problems for, obviously, the climate change and what it's creating.
So really what you're doing, you're addressing food insecurity, you're addressing sustainability concerns, you're addressing environmental concerns. It sounds like just a wonderful model. I mean, is this something that it's being replicated elsewhere or studied, or can it be replicated on a more widespread basis?
It is.
Okay.
It is. We are actually now, I'm proud to say F.A.R.M Cafe was the first community cafe in North Carolina, but there is a community cafe in the same network. We are all under the umbrella of One World Everybody Eats, which is a movement. We're not franchised, we're not held up by any kind of restrictions. We willingly join this network because that's how we can support each other. So there's a place in Raleigh called A Place at the Table. They've been open. They opened about 3 years after we did. Again, a community cafe. There's a community cafe in Johnson City called 1 Acre Cafe. We were just over there a couple of months ago to see how their operation's going. Just had a visit literally last week from a couple that's trying to open another community cafe in Pittsburgh, North Carolina. And the same day they came, ironically, a lady that used to work with us, she was in graduate school at ASU. She started a community cafe in West Virginia called Cafe Appalachia. She started that one. She's got a garden now. Her energy was off the charts. She's doing a program for women who are struggling with incarceration and drug addiction, and she's getting ready to start a second cafe. Wow. So, there are a lot of cafes, as I said, same cafe in Denver. So All May Eat is the longest running cafe. They just opened up a second place in Toledo, Ohio. But the thing that's most important about these cafes that I want to emphasize is they're all dependent on need of the community. You don't go open a cafe just because it's a cool thing to do.
Right.
You do your demographics. Does your community need it? And if they do, how do you address the needs of that community in particular? Our cafe looks nothing like One Acre Cafe, looks nothing like a place at the table. They are all different, but we're all in the same group together. And we'll have a summit conference. I just found out, I'm very excited, the summit conference is going to be in Raleigh this year. So the cafe folks from all over the country will come to visit.
Oh, that's exciting.
We haven't been able to do it during COVID. It's been online,
Right.
but that's where you really get that interaction of the different community members.
Well, and the community is such a big part of this. And it sounds like you've had a good experience in this community. I could
Yes.
imagine that some places there might be community resistance or kickback a little bit. Was there any of that here at all, or was it pretty much full buy-in?
Well, no, in the beginning there was certainly resistance and fear, and I understood it because I had my own.
Right.
We all were struggling to figure out how this thing works. And I had to I invited the, we're right downtown on King Street.
Right.
So I invited the shop owners, I invited the community in for some food, and let's talk about, what your concerns are. And I can't honestly tell you there won't be some issues. Certainly we're going to have people in our population that are struggling with addiction, struggling with alcoholism. They're going to have issues, but they're going to have issues no matter where they are. We're all in this together. Right. That's not just our role, it's your role too. And so that's been a piece of it, is trying to embrace that. What we've learned as once people start to get comfortable, and I include myself in this, getting comfortable with those who may be struggling with conditions that you've not experienced can be daunting, and it can be fearsome. But once you start those regular conversations, and again, over a plate of food is the easiest way, you realize we are not that different. We are in this thing together. And once the community started realizing that, they really became supportive. We've had the Boone Police Department volunteer with us, and that was fantastic. We've had businesses like ECRS. We just had Anna Bananas come and do a day with us. And so we've had restaurant support. For me, was remarkable. But in the beginning, you have to address those needs. And there have been a lot of community cafes that tried to open, and they weren't successful. They may have gotten open for several months, and then it went astray, because you do try to have a balance. In our cafe, we operate under the 80-20 model, although that's shifted after COVID, where you kind of hope 80% of your diners have enough means to help the 20% that are struggling. It's actually, for us right now, it's 35% and 65%, because we see a lot of folks who are working hard that just can't. We've got a young couple that have been both full-time employed, and they're living in a tent because they can't find housing.
We'll just have to say, if you can support F.A.R.M Cafe, do so. It's a wonderful movement. Our community is fortunate to have it, and we just applaud your work.
Well, I thank you so much. We feel like it's a gift that the community has given us that allows us to be in service at this
thank you for
remarkable
coming today
place.
To share about this.
Thank you.
And good luck on your new venture.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, that's it for Religion and Life for this week. I hope you'll join us next week on App TV as we continue to explore the role religion plays in our society and culture. Until then, this is Ozzie Ostwalt.